Well, it's another day. I think better get on with final part of my story here. So, welcome to Ken's Hobbies. Those of you who haven't subscribed, please do so. If you haven't followed my series, I have put it a series for my story. This will make it the fourth video on it, and you can check out the first three parts out there. Anyhow, let's get started here. I'm trying to recall where I left off in part 3. So this will be part 4 and the conclusion. I think it was mostly in the 80s where I left off in part 3. So we're going to pick it up from the 80s to present. One thing I did forget to mention in part 3 when I was at Consolidated Concrete, where I learned to drive the trucks, was them days most of the trucks had the old 5-on-4. That was 2 gear shifts, basically considered as 5-speed main and 4-speed auxiliary. Okay, I think it was in the 90s, coming into the 90s, so we're going to pick up from there. As I said, I started my own business in the 80s of Ken's Services. What I basically did with that, as I mentioned in my last video, was rebuilding appliances. But I also basically did a lot of subcontracting, and we're going to pick up from that point there. Places I did do the following year, the next year after our first one, along came number 2 and also number 3. When the third one was on its way, I picked up this contract for a place in Vanderhoof, BC that was called Vanderhoof Appliance. It covered most of the area, Vanderhoof, Fort St. James, Fraser Lake, and all the surrounding area around Vanderhoof. Interesting thing about when I go to work in Vanderhoof, well, starting time was 9 o'clock. Yeah, 9 to, always remind me to think of Dolly Parton's song, and that's how I remember. It was 9 to 6, because Dolly's song was 9 to 5. I used to take the Greyhound bus rather than drive my car from Prince George to Vanderhoof. I used Greyhound. The funny part on using the buses, I don't know how many would get chattering, and people would ask me, "Where are you off to?" I said, "I'm just off to work in Vanderhoof." "You're traveling on Greyhound?" "Well, yeah. First of all, it's cheaper than running my car back and forth. At that time I had a 1974 Mercury station wagon. So yeah, it was much cheaper there. One aspect, it was perfect, because I'd catch the bus here in Prince George at 7:30 in the morning. Generally it didn't get out till just about 8. It was only just over an hour trip from Prince George to Vanderhoof. And look at me, "Well, that's such a long distance to go to work." I look at him, I says, "Where are you from?" "Oh, I'm from down on the coast." I said, "Really?" "Oh, well, how long does it take you to get to work?" "Oh, it takes me about an hour and a half." "Really? And how many miles have you put on?" I'd ask. End of the story. They shut up after that. I said, "Yep, that's because and how I've traveled over 60 miles in the same amount of time." Right. The bad thing about that was coming back from Vanderhoof to Prince George. The bus never came to Vanderhoof till about 10:30 at night. What do you do in Vanderhoof from 6 o'clock to 10:30? Right, hit the bar. Sit in the bar, because all 3 were in the same area. So you'd sit in the bar till the bus would come in. So by the time I got back to Prince George, it was pretty well between 11:30 and midnight, being able to have your supper and straight to bed and up in the morning again. Got fed up with that, so I said to the wife, I says, "We're going to move to Vanderhoof." So we moved to Vanderhoof, and that's where my third son was born, in Vanderhoof. Got a good story there too. On our move to the way to Vanderhoof, I got pulled over by Clucas Lake. Now, the RCMP have a division point between here and Vanderhoof for their jurisdiction. The Prince George jurisdiction cutoff line was at a place called gas station and good restaurant just before you climb a big hill going up past Clucas Lake. It was called Bednesty Lake. From Bednesty Lake to Vanderhoof, it's the Vanderhoof RCMP district. So I got pulled over by Clucas Lake. It was almost at the tail end of Clucas Lake. And got pulled over. I wasn't speeding or anything. So the officer, why am I being pulled over? He said, where are you off to? I said, we're moving to Vanderhoof. Now I had the car loaded with a lot of our stuff in the car. He said, well, she can drive. You're under arrest. She can drive the rest of the way. I looked at that officer. I says, she doesn't even know how to start a car, let alone no driver's license. You expect her to drive the rest of the way? I says, no, well then you're going to have to lock it up and leave it here on the side of the road. I says, not in your life. You see what's in that car? No way. I looked around. I see a spot right over there. You want me to park the car and come with you? Let me put the car in there, in the bush. Officer looked. Yeah, okay, I'll let you do that. So I stashed the car in the bush. As soon as we got, and of course the wife had to come with at the same time. As soon as I saw he turned the car around, he's heading towards Prince George instead of Vanderhoof. I instantly knew, aha, he's out of his jurisdiction. So he hauls me off to jail. Doesn't say anything about the wife. It was the next following morning, court appearance. That's when I found out the result, what they did with my wife. She told me when he asked her where she wanted to go and stay, she gave him one of our best friends, who's also one of the godparents to one of our children. She'll go over there. And she lived on River Road, in the Island Cache here in Prince. River Road runs parallel on the south side of the Nechako River. And she told me this cop couldn't even find River Road. He spent a long time trying to find River Road. I couldn't stop laughing. Anyhow, the end result. Comes the morning, duty counselor was on there. Duty counselor comes in to have a chat and find out why you were arrested and brought there in the first place. Who's the duty counselor? Well, I'll be dipped if it wasn't my old buddy that got me my appliance ticket back in the 60s, Don Kennedy. Don came in the cell and he says, what the hell are you doing in here? So when I told him the story, oh really? Well, he's out of his jurisdiction. Just wait here, I'll be back in 1 minute. Come back in, told me you were arrested because you had a multiple pile of unpaid parking tickets. Oh really? Why didn't our cop, when I asked him several times, not tell me what I was being arrested for? He says, we just made him make a short appearance before the judge. It won't last very long. So made the appearance. Case was basically thrown out of court. Everybody that was there, boy, with his decision, that means you don't have to pay 1 penny for the tickets. Plus, that cop got his butt chewed out or something. I don't know exactly what happened with him, but I know he got in deep trouble for it anyway. So ended up, got back to Vanderhoof and picked up the car, got the rest of the way in the Vanderhoof, where my third son was born, in Vanderhoof. The place also picked up another coincidence right across the alley. It's a place called Vanderhoof Satellite and Electronics. One day, in the back alley, when I was just closing up, who comes out of Vanderhoof Satellite and Electronics? Another old 60s acquaintance back in my training on the job program back in the 60s. The best technician in Prince George at that time, Earl Geddes. Well, I'll be dipped. Earl says, so we start chumming there. Got going there. So I also ended up doing little jobs at Vanderhoof Satellite and Electronics. And Earl says, you ever get that old radio going? I says, no, I haven't really bought it. He said, we'll bring it in. We'll teach you. So he's the guy that really got me going back in electronics, repairing radios and TVs. The partner's name was Lloyd Burgess. Thus, the first name of satellite, or after Vanderhoof. Lloyd did all satellite installations around the Vanderhoof area. So he wanted me to come on him on one job, installing this satellite dish. So went with him, and ended up we partnered together and did a lot of satellite installation. One of the best ones that ever happened was with just before closing time, we get this phone call. Give us a price on your top of the line equipment. I'll call back in 10 minutes. Well, Lloyd looks at me and says, I wonder if I should take that call for real or not. It's because it's so close to quitting. Do we stay, or should we just ignore it? I looked at Lloyd and I said, well, it's a gamble, but it's worth it. Stay and see what happens. So we agreed to that. Meantime, Earl told me to bring this old radio in, and we rebuilt it and replaced all the capacitors in it and got the radio working again. Anyhow, the phone call did come back, and this was a good story because places and events that happened. Call came back in, said, boss man said go for it, but we have some instructions on how you're going to do this job. First of all, the dish. We had the solid fiberglass dishes, 10-foot dish. Water level was high in the Nechako River at the time of this particular job. Okay, therefore, one of the dams that was built here in British Columbia is called Kennedy Dam, which is kind of southwest of Vanderhoof. That was the only time near the spring where the barges could run through. So we had to take this 10-foot dish. We took it that night up to Kennedy Dam and placed it on the barge. In the morning, we were to be picked up and flown in, because there's no road to where we were putting this satellite dish up at. I think it was Tatachik Lake or something along that line. I don't remember the exact name of the lake. Well, Lloyd says, I'll pick you up in the morning. And this was at 7:30 in the morning at the Vanderhoof Seaplane Base, which was just off the north end of Burrard Street, where the bridge was across the Nechako River. So we picked me up. Both Lloyd and I thought, well, he's flying in. It'll just be a little Cessna 172 or something like that, or a Beaver. The most common planes around this area that are on pontoon. So we're standing at the dock of there when this aircraft comes in. Well, then that was okay. Lloyd and I looked at each other like, wow, this thing is a Twin Otter on pontoons. As it landed there, come into dock. Who's the pilot? Another old buddy of mine from back in my CV days, when I did a lot of help with fellow CBer. Kip Handel was Whiskey Barrel. He was training to become a pilot, and many a times I ended up enough training to become his co-pilot, because he was after hours, because he wanted to go commercial flying, and eventually with at that time it was called Canadian Pacific Airlines. So he had to get the hours, and that's how I ended up being his co-pilot. But in the meantime, that was when the 737 was first out. And the route that it took, that CP had, was Vancouver to Prince George, Prince George to Dawson Creek to Edmonton, and return. Edmonton, Dawson Creek, Prince George, Vancouver. A lot of times, the time it came back in Prince George from Edmonton, it was refueling time. So with Norm, that was his real name, was Norm Marples, we got to refuel the 737. We made 1 cent a gallon. Well, you take 2,000 gallons. That was good, quick money. Now that gives you an idea why aviation is so expensive yet to this day. Anyhow, we're standing there at this dock, and this Twin Otter, and the pilot, when he steps out, lost track there. I was talking about CPR. That's where I met Bill, and Bill started giving me lessons to obtaining my pilot's license. I never did follow it through, because it was just more than money than I could afford to put out to complete my pilot training. So back to when the pilot came out of this Twin Otter. First question he asked us, he said, did you guys get a phone call just shortly before your closing of your business? Yeah, we did. He says, and Bill and I got talking afterwards. He says, that's exactly the same thing that happened with him. After Canadian Pacific was sold out, I think that's when it became Pacific Western Airlines. He started a rental business in Victoria, BC, with budget rent-a-car. Of course, he got the phone call offering him and wanting him to be the pilot of this Twin Otter. He says, because everybody kept burning, all the pilots kept burning the engines out on this Twin Otter. And he has one of the top notches with turboprops. He says, I couldn't refuse the offer at X amount of dollars per month plus all lodging. So thus he took on the job. So then he asked Lloyd and myself, he said, you know who you guys are working for? We says, no, we have no idea. He said, well, you're working for the second richest American, Hewlett-Packard. Well, Lloyd and I looked again. We're like, wow, okay. So he flew us in. We got the satellite dish all installed towards the evening, because it's pretty well a day's job, and then installing, setting up all the equipment and that. So it was about 5, 6 o'clock at night, getting towards evening. Well, Bill looks at us and he says, well, boys, it's like this. He says, I could fly you back to Vanderhoof tonight, but then I gotta come back myself. And he says, landing on water in the dark, it's not advisable, because you gotta fill the pontoons up with water. I was kind of surprised. I looked at Bill and I said, what? He says, oh yeah. He says, haven't you ever watched when an aircraft takes off of water, and when it takes off you see the stream coming down? I said, yeah, I see that all the time. He says, well, that's them emptying the water out of the pontoons. I said, well, I'll be darned. I never knew that. So that was a good learning experience for me. Learned something I didn't know. Anyhow, and it'd be dark, so he says, this is what we'll do. We're going to put you up overnight and I'll fly you back in the morning. He says, so why don't you just call your wives, tell her that you'll be overnight. Okay, well, no telephone there. Of course, back into our radios come in. At that time, it was BC Tel and radio phone. That was the only communications out of this lake to Vanderhoof, so it was via the two-way. So we called them up, told them that we'll be overnight here. Morning comes along. Well, for morning, we'll put you up in one of the cabins. Well, what do you expect for a cabin at a lake? A small little cabin. So he led us to this cabin. We got to the cabin. Yeah, oh boy, this wasn't just a cabin. This was a mansion, and beautiful inside. It was huge, and even the rooms were huge. I took a whole roll of pictures for that trip, which I still have. Anyway, come morning, breakfast is served. Well, let me tell you, serve pancakes. Okay, what's your average pancake size? 6 inches? Yeah, that's about it. Oh no, these pancakes were huge, the full size of a plate. One pancake, and it was that thick. You were lucky if you could eat one pancake. Bill also explained about the turboprop engines to me and how they work. And he said, I'll give you an example. That's okay. He says, you hold that prop on that right engine down when I start it, and you'll feel the thrust on that prop. That's the air, once the engine starts going, that spins the prop. Okay, so I held the prop and starts the engine there. But he did say, once you let go of that prop, to stand back, because it'll catch and you won't be able to stop it. Okay, so I held it. Well, sure enough, it sounded, without that prop going, it sounded exactly like a jet engine. That's when Bill explained. That's what it is. It's basically a jet engine, only with a propeller in the front. Okay, another learning lesson for me. So that was a real big highlight. But also with Vanderhoof Appliance, I did a lot of the calls to Fort St. James, just north of Vanderhoof. Okay, 1987 comes along. We're still in Vanderhoof. I get a phone call. My dad in the hospital fell down the stairs. So we ended up moving back to Prince George. I left both Vanderhoof Electronics as well as Vanderhoof Appliance, because when we had to come back to Prince George, I knew, because of my dad being in the hospital. Well, the doctor called me into his office by myself, because he kind of knew I would be able to take it the best. He says, I'm going to put it to you straightforward. He says, your dad's in God's hands. He says, I've done all I can. I knew right then and there. I also knew what my dad's last request to me was. He told me a long time ago, before this even happened, that if he ended up having to live on a machine, he didn't want that. So I was kind of caught in the middle there for a little while, but I knew he wouldn't be coming home from the hospital. That's why the decision made was made to move back. The other reason, moving back to Prince George. Prior him going, the year before, he talked to me and he was telling me that, oh, I gotta look after the house and Mama. I distinctly remember saying, Dad, quit talking that way. A year later, lo and behold, just looking up my notes and trying to recall now where I picked up most. So, well, I still had Ken Services. So, approximately forget whether it was 1987 or the beginning of 1988, I got a phone call, or no, I ran into, golly, I can't really remember exactly how I came in contact with Richard Seal. Richard Seal was also Pat's brother, so therefore making him another ex-brother-in-law. The big thing and difference between my first marriage and my second marriage. My first marriage, I was welcomed into the family right off the bat. My second one, I'm going to give you fellas tip of warning. Check your background of your spouse's parents before you decide for a marriage. My mom, years ago when I was a teenager, told me one thing that I have never forgot. She told me at that time, you can have many friends in your lifetime, but it only takes one person that can destroy you. Yep, that is exactly what happened with me in the late 80s and the beginning of the 90s. That person was my mother-in-law. There was a song done by the OJs, and the song was called Mother-in-Law. Or no, correction, Backstabbers. Every word and lyric in that song fit 100% in my case. Those of you who've never heard that song, check it out. But in that song, there's a line where it says, they'll smile to you in your face, but behind your back they'll stab you. That's exactly what happened in our case. Backstab. Anyhow, with Richard, he invited me on one of his jobs, and what he did was, his name of his business was Boards and Stuff Renovations, and he did a lot of drywall work, and he invited me to help him with this one drywall job. So I started hanging out with him, and we eventually pretty much became partners in renovations because of my past knowledge and my dad also teaching me carpentry even before I started my appliance service. So in the 90s, that's when we bought our first house. It was on Grant Road. Well, her parents didn't like the house one bit. There's two features the house had. Number one, the house itself was exactly the letter X, shaped like that. And it sat on top of a hill. I used to always tease the wife with Jimmy Rogers' song, a house on the hill and a girl in the house on the way to Bim Bombay. Or was it Jimmy Rogers? Yeah, I'm sure it was Jimmy Rogers. Anyway, they hated the place. I turned around and I told him right to the face, I says, it's not you we're buying the house for, we're buying it for us. If you don't like it, there's the door. That's when all hell really broke loose. I won't get into that because it's a long story. All I'll say is the end results out of that, I ended up fighting in court for 2 years. I did win the case. Now remember I mentioned about backstabbers. That's pretty well what happened. It was in over the children. And that's all I'm going to say at this point. We ended up a total of 7 children in total. They're all grown up now and on their own. 3 of my boys are all IT techs now. I don't really know how or where to begin in saying how. This video is going to be a little bit longer than my past videos because I want to make this my last video of my story. Anyway, I'll just say it this way. A pile of false accusations were made and the children were apprehended on us. That's what the fight in court was all about. With them being apprehended, of course, our income went down. So it was a choice. We had a choice. Either A, we put the house up for sale, or B, we lose the house under foreclosure. So we decided to sell out. We ended up selling the house and we were basically forced to separate. Okay, this was around 1990, 1991. That's when our last son was born. So in between that, I decided to go taxi driving, make a little extra. What I ended up doing there So I eventually found out how the basic operation of the taxi worked here. I was with Prince George Taxi Association. And that's when I found out all cars, the numbers, were classified as shares. It was a sharing there. So you owned or leased a share of the cab number. So I invested, my mom lent me the money for investing into buying a share, and my share number was 36. I was making enough money on that, and I could see the potential for taxis here in Prince George. I ended up getting a second taxi, but I only leased that share, and that was taxi number 11. Coincidence with that number 11. Before I bought my share, I was driving other taxis. One particular one I managed to drive one day was cab number 11. We became the owner of cab number 11. We became good friends, and they're the godparents to one of our children. Our last daughter was born October 11th, and when I got this applied for a lease, that was my lease number, 11. Little coincidence there. Anyways, post a picture here of my two taxis there. Briefly, what happened there, 36 was the Pontiac and 11 was a Ford LTD. It was a 79. Both of them were 79s. The problem was the Pontiac Parisian, it was beautiful car. It was fully loaded, and what I picked it up for, and it sat more than it was driven. By the time I finished prepping that as a cab, I think I started the cab war with the taxis, because almost everybody started getting Crown Victorias after that, fully loaded. What happened there was 36 kept breaking down on me all the time, and I was in fear prior to that happening, because being set, because the person I bought the car from had a company vehicle, and there he used the company vehicle more than this Pontiac 11, the Ford LTD, bailed that Pontiac so many times, and each course with each vehicle having to be inspected thoroughly twice a year, the Pontiac kept basically two-bitting me to death. Like I said, 11 we used to bail me out. As much as I hate Ford, turns out that the most reliablest one that I've owned of all the Chevys, Pontiacs, and Fords, and Toyotas, the top two most reliable were the Pontiac, or the Toyota I should say, and number one, the Ford. How can you knock Ford? Even though my favorite saying for Ford is flip over, read directions. The downfall with Ford and GM was parts. It was much cheaper for the GM parts than Ford parts. Anyway, the last day I just booked on for duty and started down the highway, and all of a sudden, bang! That was the last of 36. Yep. Code 5, rear end blew. I just finished putting thousands of dollars into that Pontiac. Therefore, now I only had 11 left. My 1 year lease, first of all, month prior to that happening, or the same month, I can't remember exactly which it was, but the lease ran out on let 11 go. And of course, now I had no money left to rebuild this rear end in this Pontiac. Thus, I ended up losing the share of 36. 1998 is the year my mom passed away. Well, I inherited the house of my parents. So thus I tried to rebuild my appliance division of rebuilding washers and dryers and ranges and fridges. That started to go not too bad again, till one of the neighbors started squawking about all my appliances in the yard. City bylaw comes along, puts a clamp again, and you're not back on welfare. Now, I have to tell this. I was classified by welfare as a single person because the wife and I were separated at the time. Therefore, they only classified me as single. What was the income for a single person back in 1998? I will say it, and I'm not ashamed to say it. $510 a month. That's all I got. Do your math of what it costs to keep a house going. I calculated average of $880 to keep the house. Now, with Mom's passing away, I'm the executor of the place. Even though, despite my mom paying for her own funeral expenses from the time she originally paid it, additional charges were added to it. And my lawyer fees and all the rest that came into it as being the executor and in getting the will probated and all that, I had to break my promise that I promised Mom before she passed away, because she was in fear of me selling the house and losing everything. Well, in the end, that's what happened, but I promised her that that would not happen. Because of welfare, I was practically forced to have to take a mortgage on the house. I applied every bank. Of course, I was denied. No choice left with owing back taxes. Now, this is why I'm going to tell the story, because why you do not want to go on welfare. Like I said earlier on, biggest mistake I ever did do. Oh, you're not supposed to own a house if you're on welfare, and they'll do everything they can to get you the hell out. They did. Number one, I had to go to the loan sharks. That was the only way I got to get a mortgage. Before I knew it, that I was approved, they were on there and they had taken court orders, because in the meantime they slapped a child support maintenance against me for $400 and some odd a month. So they turned around, slapped a court order on it that if the house ever sold and all that, Judy gets all the money, not me. Plus, they deliberately every month held my check back, knowing that the day my payment for the mortgage was come, they deliberately held it back so that I'd miss the payment. You tell me now, if there wasn't scamming in there, you darn right it was. And it goes back to what I said earlier on. So I ended up losing the house. I'm going to add a couple of things here to say in regards with this. First of all, my dad built that house from foundation to finish. And it still hurts me to this day that I lost the place. I have learned two things. Number one, as you heard me say, don't go on welfare if you can avoid it. Because any branch of the government in all departments work together. One feeds the other. Read the book of Romans in the Bible. I'm sorry to say, but it does say in there, we are all of spirits. Our forces either come A, from God, or B, from Satan. Now, God wants us to have a success. Satan doesn't. Tell me, is the government not doing Satan's work? For sure it is. And you wonder why I'm still mad to this day and why I got absolute no use for the government. Now I had no place to go, and one of the did a lot of repairs for a fellow by the name of Mohinder Bing. Well, he come over and wanted me to come and check a washer there. I says, I can't, I got X amount of time I got to be out by. And he asked me if I had a place to live yet. I said, no, I haven't even had time to even look for a place. So I'll be back in an hour. One thing that's got to be added in here that I almost forgot. 1998 was not only the year my mom passed away, and I also had quite a serious car accident. As you see in the picture I posted, car got totaled. As a result of that accident, that changed my life for the rest of my days. What happened with me was I was hit so hard, as you see in the picture, that I received whiplash out of it, as the doctor described to me. I don't remember the accident. All I remember is what my wife told me and others, witnesses that saw it happen, told me. I do remember a few things after we were hit, but when I came back to what the doc explained to me, as a result, I went over the back seat, stretching my spinal cord, and that's what caused my blank out. When I came back down, it pinched my sciatic nerve. Doctor told me then, too, I got good news and I got bad news. Which do I want first? I said, well, Doc, give me the bad news first and give me the good news second. Doctor looks at me, well, that's kind of backwards. Usually it's the other way around. I says, I know, but doesn't the good always cheer the bad up? He agreed. Yeah, you got a point. Okay, the bad news is your career is over. The good news is I'm signing your disability paper. So basically, I've been on disability ever since 1998. Being on disability was automatic retirement when I reached the age of 65. Now that I'm fully retired, the income still isn't great. Luckily, the wife is still able to work. But what happens are, once again, our typical government. Whatever she makes, and if it's over above X amount of dollars, that is deducted and my income goes down. That is unfair, taking away from a person that's on pension, making it lower. Another reason they cry, oh, these homeless people. Well, look at what the government does. Blame the government. That's where all the problems exist, because of the government. I talked with an RCMP one time. They even said the same thing. Yeah, if only the system could wake up, half the crime would be reduced. And I have to agree. Rent hiking now is so high, there's no way that I could afford to rent anymore. Thank goodness Judy has this place and I have a roof over my head. If it wasn't for Judy, I'd be joining the homeless. I'm going to add in here at the same time how I got my Class 1 driver's license. This is a story worth telling too in this part. 1995, Prince George Transit System here in Prince George was expanding new routes and new services. I knew all the bus drivers there, and they all wanted me to come driving. So I told them, well, this is great. Only one problem. I don't have my air endorsement on my driver's license because I already had a Class 2 driver's license for buses. So I've worked on air brake equipment before. According to the Act, if you had experience in air brakes, you don't need to go through the course. If you just obtain a letter from your past employer stating that you've worked on air brakes. So I got a hold of Consolidated Concrete as well as Prince George Limousine. Well, Consolidated says, we got no records of you working here. Great. Prince George Limousine, yeah, I'll send you a letter, was promised. I kept waiting and waiting and waiting. No letter. So in the end, one of the drivers told me deadline date. I says, oh gee, that only gives me a few days. So I grabbed the telephone, phoned the college up. I said, when's your next air brake course? They says, oh, it's a month and a half away. Well, I can't wait that long. I need it ASAP. So the person I was talking with at college says, well, we know one fella here in town that just started driving school for Class 1. I'm sure he's got an air brake course coming up. So they gave me his phone number. Name of the outfit was Fox Driving School. So I phoned Fox Driving. I says, when's your next air brake course? He says, oh, starts tomorrow morning. I says, good, book me in and send the bill to Ken Services. And how much is it? Well, he told me, that's $135 for the course. But we don't bill. It's got to be paid up front. Once again. Okay, this is one revenge I did get back a little bit back from welfare. In the book, it says if you got a job to go to, they would pay your cost of whatever is needed to get that job. Right? Wrong. First of all, you think BC Transit, which is the affiliated for Prince George Transit System, is going to give a letter stating that you got the job to drive a bus if you get your air brake endorsement on? Not in your life. So when I was on the phone with, I phoned this Fox Driving School. Lo and behold, if it wasn't our driver training examiner who does the road exams. His name was Dave Bagg. Wait a minute, I already said that, or did I? Anyway, moral of the story and the way the story went. I go to the welfare office and I said, well, I got a chance to get a job driving bus for the city. But I need $135 to pay for this air brake course. Of course, they told me what was in the book. Well, if you can give us a letter, we'll pay it. Right. So when I was on the phone with Dave Bagg, this is where I got mixed up with myself even. When I was talking with Dave, on the from Fox Driving. He says, I know a fella there that's willing to help you try to get off of the system. His name's Howard Jackson. Howard Jackson. Where have I heard that name before? I'm thinking. Somewhere I've heard that name before. So he gave me his phone number. I phoned him up and he says, well, bring me your resume. We'll have a little chat. Okay. So I took my resume and Howard's reading through it. Oh, I see you've driven truck before. I looked at Howard. I says, you're the first one that could read in between the lines. So this is what Howard did. Out opens the door. Out comes the pen and paper. Writes down. This is to verify that Kenneth Flynn has a job starting September the 1st, provided he has Class 1 driver's license as well as air brake endorsement. He underlines it 5 times. Hands me the letter and says, I think this will do what you need. Well, okay. I didn't ask for a course. Now I'm getting a course offered. So I take that letter into the office at Welfare. No problem. No questions asked. It ended up costing Welfare $2,685 to put me through a Class 1 driving course with air brake endorsement. So I laughed all the way to the bank because all I was asking for was $135. Another example of your government. And when I did get working with Howard, I found out he was the head honcho for General Motors for the parts division. Well, lo and behold, if I didn't first meet him when I was at Stelbar Chev Olds in Edmonton, Alberta. Aha, that's where I heard the name before. Anyhow, I ended up as Howard's right-hand man. And a few other trips, I got a picture, I'll put it on here. One of the hauls I did, and what he basically was doing was hauling hay and selling farm equipment. I have another story there, but I'm not going to place it on here. But I'll say this, in that first picture I put on when we had to move out of our house, that was Howard's 1-ton truck and trailer that he let me use for us, the wife and I, to move out of the house from Grant Road. Howard was the second best person I ever worked with or at since Northern Toyota. I think I did mention about the car accident in 1998. Getting back to Mohinder, when I said about him being back in an hour. Well, he did come back. He said, well, I just bought a place. Took me down to the place. Well, yeah. Well, for you, so you can got a roof over your head. That's another story. I'm going to put the picture of the place on here. Made a deal. I'd fix the place up at X amount of dollars per hour. We shook hands on the deal. In the end, I got stabbed again in the back. I got even with him, though. That's when I decided. In the meantime, my sister's husband passed away, and she was living on a farm in Wetaskiwin, Alberta. So hearing that her husband passed away, I decided at that time, well, what have I got to lose? She needs help on the farm. I'm better off to go to Alberta to assist my sister on the farm. Thus, I moved back to Alberta. Only this time, I moved to Wetaskiwin with my sister, blood sister that is. Quickly saying, that's when I found out what a stroke can do to a person. My sister's had 3 strokes, and she got so bad you could not live with her. I was a nervous wreck. And the trip I took to Edmonton then from Wetaskiwin, my ex-sister-in-law saw what a nervous wreck I was. She says, you're better off, she says, move up here. You can stay with me and I'll get you in with Capital Housing in Edmonton. So she got on the phone and right away, started making arrangements to get me into Capital Housing. So I ended up in Edmonton. Her name was Doreen. She was also related to me through my first marriage, because she was a sister to my first wife. I laughed one comment. She made it to me one time. She said, I wonder what Pat would say now if she heard they're living, staying with me. Yep. I said, well, I don't think she'd mind. Or something to that effect is what I said. Anyhow, quickly to wrap this up, got into my own place, and I tell you, by long far shot, one of the best places I ever lived up to this point. The apartment was called Ashton Apartment, and where it was so much fun, and with the caretaker there, name was Benta. She was Danish, and she used to put all kinds of events. Every Easter, we had a great big lounge in Ashton Apartments. So she used to give a turkey dinner for both all the special occasions. Plus, she had a karaoke machine, and we used to have karaoke nights in the lounge there. It was so fun, and I got to meet and be friends with quite a few people. I did not really want to leave Edmonton nor this place. Two basic reasons why I ended up leaving Ashton Apartments and coming back to Prince George. Number one was Richard kept hounding me, wanting me to come back and be with him because he didn't want to start training somebody else and working with him. The second was because of the legalization of marijuana. Benta had no choice but letting some of the peoples in there. Well, it got to the point I cannot breathe when anybody lights up any marijuana. Benta had the same complaint, but she was powerless. So that's why I moved back to Prince George. But at the same token, I told Richard that I needed a minimum of $1,500 a month because I'm falling behind and everything there. And that's what I calculated my budget for an income to be. So Richard agreed to it. Thus the move. In that move, I couldn't get everything on. And again, my ex-family tree comes in. Roy offered to move me back. He had a great big trailer. So I took him up on the offer, and that's who I was storing most of my stuff from when my house sold, because I had to put everything in storage at Hart Used Store. But I do also at the same time have to thank Peter, who owned Hart Used Store. When I lost the house, Peter says, take the 5-ton and go get your stuff, because if what you don't get out, you'll lose it all. I don't want to see you lose it all. And I'll give you a shed you can put all the stuff in. So he gave me one of the largest sheds that I could put my stuff in. Of course, there was a rental fee there. Even though it was a reduced rental for me, I was running out of money and I didn't get enough money coming in. Richard's brother, Roy, who's also Pat's sister, says that he's got all these trailers on his lot. He lived just a shade out of the city limits, which I believe now is city limits. But anyway, he took all the stuff out of Hart Used Store and stored it for me, including my 79 LTD. Anyway, so much was given to me when I was in Edmonton and when Roy found a truck that he at the same time purchased, this Toyota 4x4 truck. The time we loaded it at the trailer, every bit of that truck, the inside and the box with my stuff, there was a lot that got left behind. I said at that time that I would be back to get the balance. I can't say what day, but I would be back. Well, almost a month went by. I couldn't get money to go back to there. So my ex-wife, Pat, she phones me up. She says, well, I got the deal for you. She was married to a fella in Edmonton, and I knew what she was up to. For her protection, she loved collecting antiques, and there's one antique that we had picked up together that I refurnished and all that. So she treasured that. Anyway, she was wanting her antiques taken to Edmonton. So she contacted Roy, and Roy said he'd there. So she picked up this trailer. Roy picked in the trailer up. We loaded it up, took all our antiques to Edmonton. Funny moment happened there too. Pat's present husband's name was Ed. Pat had 2 sewing machines, the old type with the pedal that you pedaled to make the sewing machine work. We're taking them off this trailer, and Ed looks at us and he says, why in the hell does she want 2 sewing machines? So I looked up at Ed. I said, well, Ed, that's easy. I said, one to fix your shirts and one to fix your pants. Pants with the feet going like this, and one on each machine. He turned dead silent, and the look on his face, I wished I had a camera ready. We laughed so loud and so long and so hard. Anyhow, it's getting a little bit longer than I was hoping for, but like I said, I want to close this as being my last video. I don't want to do any more after, so we're going to finish it off here because I'm almost at the tail end of what I want to say about my story. Anyhow, I ended up moving back from Edmonton, like I said, Richard talked me into moving back, and I did promise my youngest son when he graduated that I would be at his graduation. Well, that occurred in 2008. So in 2008, I came back and I stayed for a while with Roy and his wife. Did a few tow jobs with Roy because he had his business that he started was Roy's Towing. So therefore, got experience with towing. So 2009 comes around. That's when I made the move, the big move from Edmonton back to Prince George, and started working with Richard. Oh, also, Richard and I had one particular job where I met another person by the name of Tony. Tony used to have me help him on quite a few jobs too in drywall, and man, he outdid Richard in drywall. Richard was good with everything else. Tony was expert at drywall, and he taught me a lot of tricks. So that's who I really learned my drywall skills from, was from Tony. Anyway, pretty well stayed with Richard until retirement. That same job where I met Tony is where Richard had a major accident with he fell off a ladder. I ended up having to completely finish the job by myself. After Richard's fall, I seen him going downhill after that. Anyhow, pretty much stayed with Richard till his retirement. He is now fully retired, and that's shutboards and stuff, renovation down. As for my own business, Ken Services, I shut that down just before I moved back to Alberta, 2003. This pretty well concludes my story. So you can see now all the trades that I have done, places I have been, is why I decided to call my channel Ken's Hobbies, and why you will see a variety of things. As my dad said, I'm a jacket king of all trades, master of none. Well, that ain't quite right, because I do have tickets in basically three fields. That was another thing Dad said. During a man's career, he averages 4 careers in his lifetime. I kind of laughed at that at first, but found it to be true. As I said, now you see where all my skills have come from, and I appreciate you taking the time. My apologies for this last video being on the lengthy side, but I did not want to do another one. That being said, I'd like to thank you for watching, and I hope you do subscribe. Till next time, adios.